heard my great-grandmother say, you don't need to worry about allotting all of your ancestors a fair amount of time to spend with them because we've already kind of voted and I'm the speaker. I'm going to one that's going to tell you that you are an alcoholic and you need to seriously look at your drinking. And if you want to have any further growth or improve your life whatsoever, you've got to stop drinking.
Welcome to Psychedelics in Recovery Integration Radio, a safe space where PIR, persons in recovery, come and share their experience, strengths and hope with us, with you. Integration Radio is a podcast by Psychedelics in Recovery. The views shared are personal and do not represent PIR as a whole. PIR does not promote, endorse, or sell psychedelics or any substances. This podcast is for reflection and integration only, and is not medical or professional advice. We ask listeners to respect anonymity and the principles of recovery. Please see the safety and ethics page on our website for additional resources, psychedelicsinrecovery.org. My name is Anne. I'm a person in recovery and your host today. This radio is part of PIR's ongoing effort to carry the message of recovery to those still suffering. In alignment with the 12 traditions that guide our fellowship, this program will not be funded by outside contribution. PIR as an organization has no opinion on outside issues. While we discuss plant medicine and psychedelics in this episode, PIR does not promote or endorse their use. The spiritual intention of PIR and of this broadcast is to create diverse, safe, and sacred spaces for all who wish to recover, always striving for humility over hubris and principles before personalities. Whether you're new to the idea of integrating psychedelics or plant medicine in your recovery process, new to recovery or long-time member of the fellowship, our aim is to create a space of curiosity, connection, and hope. In this first series, entitled Journeys of Healing, we explore the intersection of recovery and the transformative potential of psychedelic medicine through some of our members' experience. So, settle in, open your mind, and let's walk this path together. This is the PIR Integration Radio. And today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Christy, who has come to share extraordinary experience of reaching recovery through psychedelics. Hello, Christy, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Hi, Anne. I'm glad to be here.
I particularly wanted to have you on this podcast because you're one of the few people in PIR at the moment that hasn't come through another fellowship, another 12-step program. You came straight into PIR. Can you tell us a bit more about your background story? How you came to knock on the door, how you discovered psychedelic and why?
Sure. In a nutshell, I had been suffering from depression for a number of years. And in my attempts to treat it, along with therapy and, of course, my doctor's assistance, after several years, we decided that it was time to try something new because I found myself having some of the same problems come up over and over and over, kind of a wash, rinse, repeat type of cycle. And it was suggested that I try psychedelics to open my mind to what might actually be my core issue. And initially, I was really hesitant because I had never tried psychedelics. I didn't know how I felt about psychedelics. I was really confused. I only had previous negative stereotypes from my very conservative background. And we thought we would give it a go rather than look at another potential medication change. And that's when I started researching psychedelic therapists and began what would become a 9-month process in even initiating the journey. I had reached out and through research found a well-established psychedelic practitioner. And I remember planning the trip and thinking, okay, well, nothing really could go worse. So let's kind of see what happens and be open to it. And at first, as I got ready, I had a lot of preparation sessions first, a lot of questions about what I hope to gain through my psychedelic exploration, what end result, what did I want to come out of it? And I remember thinking, well, I want to figure out what's really eating at me. I want to figure out why I continue to find myself in these depressive and anxious patterns, and also why I was drinking so much. I had had some stressful experiences and had learned to soothe my stressful emotions with alcohol. And that became an unfortunate coping pattern for me, was learning to numb and escape difficult feelings, anxious feelings, depressive feelings, lonely feelings. And with a lot of work and a lot of planning, set and setting were key. We had discussed meditations, readings. I went into it prepared and I took my dose. And I remember thinking, okay, because I'm a real kind of concrete, organized, like to put things in some kind of order person. And I remember thinking, okay, how am I going to do this fairly? I want some ancestral knowledge. I want some outside perspective, or maybe it's inside perspective, but I needed a new perspective. And I remember taking my initial dose and then waiting and failing to drop in because I had this idea of, I want to have this journey fairly and respectfully. So I tried to calculate how far back into the generations, like how old my ancestor was, the oldest ancestor that I could remember that had an impact on my childhood. And for me, that happened to be a great grandmother. I had a great relationship with her, and she passed when I was still young, but I was old enough to have a strong impression. And I remember thinking, okay, should I give 30 minutes time to commune with my late father? Should I give, secondary time, maybe 30 minutes for the first degree relatives? Like, how am I going to hear from everyone? And getting very cerebral with it. And my therapist, the psychedelic therapist, saying, Christy, the medicine will work. Your job is to relax, close your eyes, to get comfortable, and know that I'm right here with you. You're safe. And of course, we had done all the responsible things. We were checking and monitoring vital signs, blood pressure especially, just to make sure this was done safely. And amidst all that, before it had even started, I had provided a lot of personal medical information that would have been helpful for them to know in making recommendations prior, as far as which medications to try and taper off, and maybe some to avoid for fear that they would interact with the actual mechanics of the psilocybin and interfere with the journey. So I relaxed finally and closed my eyes. And it wasn't long before I saw my great grandmother. And she was an old, dignified lady. And I can remember her shaking her bony hand finger at me and just saying, Christy, you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. And I remember thinking, and first of all, she never talked like that. And it was just all messages about reducing alcohol. I heard my great grandmother say, you don't need to worry about hearing everybody in order and allotting all of your ancestors a fair amount of time to spend with them, because we've already kind of voted, and I'm the speaker. I'm one that's going to tell you that you are an alcoholic and you need to seriously look at your drinking. And if you want to have any further growth or improve your life whatsoever, you've got to stop drinking.
Was that the first time that came to your awareness that you were an alcoholic?
Yes, the very first time. And honestly, I felt like I'd been shortchanged. At first, I was so in denial and so, frankly, egocentric that it had not occurred to me that a lot of the problems I was having were actually a direct result of my alcohol abuse. And before I had that epiphany, I genuinely wanted to blame other things, other situations, other people. I didn't really want to look inside myself because, after all, I didn't think I had a problem. So I remembered thinking, well, gosh, this is going to be a lot of work now. I was really hoping for lights and colors and just a burst of positivity. And yeah, you know, and I remembered afterwards we were processing with my therapist and realized that, yeah, if that was the message, and as it turned out, I had a few shots of screwball before the psychedelic journey even started, before I should have done it. And I knew better, but I was still an alcoholic. And I was thinking this journey could last maybe 5 or 6 hours. That's a long time to go without a drink. So I can only imagine the journey I would have had if I hadn't had a few shots of whiskey beforehand. So from there, we realized that I had a drinking problem. I accepted that I had a drinking problem. Everything lined into place. And that began a formal alcohol moderation program. We developed a treatment plan and conditions for when I went home. It ended up being a multi-page treatment plan that several therapists had collaborated on, and my primary therapist at home and my psychedelic therapist, and then also another that was part of the ceremony. And we put together an alcohol moderation plan that on paper looked really great and responsible. It really did. And I was going to try and just have 2 drinks a day, standard drinks, not playing with cup size this time. 2 standard drinks after 5. And that shouldn't have seemed too hard, but it only lasted a couple of days. And I found myself falling into a pattern of hiding my drinking again, even to the point where I found myself eventually wanting to wake up earlier than my partner so that I could sneak a drink in before anyone would ever know. And I knew then I was really on a slippery slope. Being part of this alcohol moderation program, I had daily tasks to do morning and night, checklists, journal prompts, meditations, great resources to books about living sober and managing your alcohol intake. And I ended up about a month later, by October, just completely, it was a joke. I'd go out for friends knowing that and I would state that I wanted to be held accountable for only 2 drinks during the meal, but they didn't know if I'd had anything before. So it was really heading in a pretty destructive way. My depression got more and more intense, especially as the holidays came around, because I am divorced um, from my husband that I had my children with. And was drinking more, but also had a plan to go back to have another journey with my facilitator because I knew there was more, and I knew that what I was doing wasn't working. But what I had started to do with the alcohol moderation plan was making some progress and was giving me some real things to chew on, to marinate on, to really acknowledge the depth of my alcohol abuse. And so I went in January. I had a scheduled session, and this time I didn't drink beforehand. And I knew the same thing, that it could be potentially 5 or 6 hours. But I also remembered that during that time, during my last journey, I had updosed. And when I did that, I was able to eat a snack. And I had a little bit more tea. So I was able to reassure myself, yeah, it's going to be 5 or 6 hours, but you can have a light snack beforehand, and this is really good medicine. So I don't want to get in the way of that. It would almost be like going and having the flu and going to get flu medicine because it will help, but knowing that it's 10 years old that was maybe rescued from grandma's house and you're not really giving it the full chance to be its pure self and to work unbothered, maybe uncomplicated. So this time I went in. Same thing. We had done a lot of preparation sessions and, of course, had a lot of integration sessions scheduled afterwards. And this time I went in and wow, there was no messing around with giving ancestors time to speak or holding space for them. It was all about a giant building, a solid building, like a big brick type skyscraper or something huge and profound and meaningful. And I wanted to go in, but the doors were locked. And instead of seeing like maybe an electronic fob to get into a building, it was a breathalyzer, almost like what an interlock would remind you of. You had to blow on it. And if no alcohol was detected in your system, you could enter. I was sober at the time because this time I didn't have a couple of shots of whiskey before my journey. And all of a sudden, it wasn't frightening at all. It was just a building, almost like I was traveling somewhere great. And there was something that I had heard about and read about, but didn't really know if it was true. But I'm kind of a curious kind of person. And so I went ahead and in my journey, flew through the breathalyzer and I didn't have alcohol, so I was allowed in. And I remember this being this beautiful waiting room, almost like a nice dermatologist's office waiting room with everything you could imagine. Some cold water, lots of resources, lots of books, the big book, the ACA book, the 12 and 12, all kinds of mythical books, all kinds of science books, all kinds of books about spirituality. It just represented an omnipresent just source of information and a comfortable place to choose and read and learn from the resources that were there. But you had to wait until, in this journey, it was a representation of just a very nondescriptive person with a clipboard. And once you had read long enough and meditated, because it was a very comfortable spot, almost like a sunken in living room, but a waiting room too, then someone would come to the door with the clipboard and call your name. And it was my time. And I was excited. I thought, well, where are we going to go? Because it was all, behind a locked area until you were called. And I remembered he was almost like an orientation guide or a tour guide, if you will, and going and saying, here, this is our section for when you're scared. We've got everything you might need to soothe yourself. And I remember there being things like soft blankets and soft, soothing music and some aromatherapy and just basically saying, see, here, we can manage your anxiety. We can help you to feel one again, to feel like yourself and not so worried. And then another room for depression, another one for addiction, because by this point I knew that I had an addiction problem. And it explained that it had all the tools and all the hope and everything I needed, and went through room by room, from beautiful family holiday gatherings and experiences and the joy of births and graduations and winning ball games and just all good feelings. But then I had to go back down. I couldn't stay. And I remember thinking, well, this looks really great. This sounds like what I'd like. But it was explained to me that I can only experience this if I can blow clean on the tour that he takes me on. That since I was still drinking in my everyday life, even though not that particular day of the journey, but the day before and the day before and the
So
day before.
how did you integrate that with your therapist and your team?
Oh, wow. I pretty much said, okay, there's really not a choice here. I have to stop drinking altogether because I've been shown how life could be, how one could achieve comfort, how one could live free from fear, how one could live free from shame and resentment. But I had to completely quit drinking. So that's when we went back to the board and came up with a whole new sobriety treatment plan. Not alcohol management or alcohol moderation, but a sobriety.
Total abstinence.
Complete. We integrated it as being just that I am sabotaging some of my own well-being by engaging in very unhealthy behavioral patterns, lasting unhealthy beliefs about myself in the way I interact with the world. And so I was introduced to PIR and was told, or was recommended, let me phrase that amongst other things, I join PIR and attend meetings daily and get sober with a sponsor. And I had a great plan for that. I still had a few days to, shall I say, dry out because I quit cold turkey then. And I had actually brought a few bottles of wine for me for this trip, for this psychedelic journey. I keep underestimating the power of the psilocybin, but boy, it can sure get through my skull. And I remember pouring those bottles out, and there was a metal trash chute where we were staying. There was a hallway, and we were on about the 15th floor. And I remember this satisfying sound as I took those glass bottles of alcohol and flung them down a metal trash chute. And I could hear the echo of the glass breaking as it hit the bottom of the ground. And just thinking, there, get away, get out of my life. You're done. I'm breaking up with you. This is it. And there was a part of me that was thinking, some people really could have used that. But then I thought, what a dumb thing to think. Who wants an alcoholic's leftover liquor that they decided was destroying their life? And so it was so poisonous, they had to smash it down a trash chute. And you really think someone else is going to need this? I realized how asinine my thinking had become and how I would do all kinds of mind tricks to rationalize or justify behavior that I knew was hurting me, that I knew was detrimental to my health, detrimental to my relationships, detrimental to my sense of self, and was just leading me in an extraordinarily dangerous situation. So I had
That's
to
the insane thinking, the insanity that we talk about on step 2. And I think you were able to witness it, but I wonder if you would have been able to have it removed had it not been for you walking in PIR meetings and working the steps with a sponsor. I'd like you to talk to us about your early days in PIR, your first impression getting into the fellowship, and how quickly you got onto the steps and finding a sponsor.
Wow, the first PIR meeting. Well, first of all, I'd never done an online Zoom meeting, and my my tech skills initially were lacking. And I can remember at first thinking, okay, this is going to be embarrassing. Everyone's going to know that like I'm in recovery from something. They're probably going to judge me and think I'm kind of at amateur hour because I don't really understand a lot of the words they're using and the descriptions of some of the experiences they've had. But I stayed with it because I heard stories about hope and I heard stories of people that had utilized psilocybin to help them in their recovery journeys to really get at the core issues, the core wounds, the things that had happened in life that seemed to create the need for a coping skill or a way to numb or avoid feeling feelings, or at least just turn them off for a little bit or turn them down. But there were some women that reached out really warmly, almost from the very first meeting. I would get a text, welcome to the fellowship. Here's my number. If you have any questions, feel free to call. And I saw a lot of people in meetings that I developed a really strong respect for because they were willing to be vulnerable and share stories of times that I realized must have been really embarrassing for them. Times that they had struggled, but also times they overcame. And I was familiar with the struggle part, but I wasn't as familiar with the overcoming it. So I knew that they had experienced something that I wanted to experience. And fortunately, I met a very warm woman that I felt like I could relate to. I almost felt like she had been through some stuff and look at her now. And that person ended up being my sponsor. And at first, especially from being, in a smaller populated area, just thinking, oh, thank goodness this is going to be safe. This is someone that's in another country and I won't run into her when I go to the grocery store or, I won't see her in public and she won't necessarily see me and possibly judge me. I was that insecure and that much of a people pleaser and that worried about what other people thought. And it was really superficial. And I don't know why, but I had let thinking like that motivate a lot of my behavior.
Don't we
But I
all?
took a chance. Hmm?
Don't we all? I think
Yeah.
everyone gets into recovery with full of self-centered fear and incredibly worried about what other people think of us, forgetting about what we think of ourselves, which is far more important. Sorry to have interrupted.
No, I love it.
How did that go? How did you get on the steps? And if you don't mind explaining briefly what that step journey has been for you and where you are right now in your step work.
Well, currently I am about to start step 11, but at the time, step 1, yes, I developed a rapport with my sponsor, and that person is Anne. And what was interesting about it is that we talked. We would just, you took the time to establish a rapport and just got me comfortable to you, period. And getting to know you and developing that sense of trust. And then I remember when we started the step work, I remember looking at the 12 steps and I remember asking you, because I really was so new to all this, having not even stepped into a single AA meeting or any kind of 12 step. And I asked you, how long do you think this is going to take? I remember you saying, probably 6 months to a year. And I remember thinking, oh no, this is really going to be a lot of work. But it was, and it has been, and it's been so worth it. I can't emphasize that enough. So I remember step 1, admitting that you have a problem and that your life is out of control. And I remember thinking, this should be an easy one. Yeah, check. Okay, step 2. But you weren't like that. You would say, no, I want you to show me. Tell me the ways you're out of control. How was your life unmanageable? wasn't going to accept just okay, you say it's unmanageable. Yeah, you get it. I get it. Okay, moving on. Step 2. No. We spent quite a bit of time, several weeks, listing all the ways my life had become out of control, from a declining health status, from a declining quality of my relationships, to some flat out bad decisions, and truly helped me to see that really continuing on my same path would have resulted in the same results. Negative, increasingly powerful in consequence results. And so I think through doing that step 1 and praying and getting to know my higher power and not being told that it had to be an authoritarian male figure of authority, because I'd had a negative relationship with a male in my life. And the idea of being able to discover your own higher power and define it for yourself made the notion of spirituality a lot less conflicted for me. And I learned that my higher power could be a tremendous guide for me. Insight. And just the insight and the looking deeper that I was forced to do from taking more than just a few minutes to check off the box of step 1. And so it went for the other steps too, taking about a month to work each step. And I've heard other people say, that's a bit quick. But when you think about it, I had never been part of a 12-step program. So this experience in PIR was my first with each of the 12 steps, including things like looking at some of your resentments in life, one's harms, one's maybe inappropriate coping skills, faulty thinking patterns. It was almost like a deep dive into the self and not just going through life day by day, knowing that there were sources of knowledge and knowing that one could take time to meditate and pray, but not really considering it to be an acute, integral part of daily practice and daily living, and using the insight of my higher power to think more lovingly and compassionately with people, and in my exchanges be more empathetic, and instead of automatically being defensive and taking things very personally, oftentimes when that really wasn't the case, and continuing on reacting as a result of those false beliefs. The medicine helped break that pattern. I have not drank since then. I've had opportunities, and during different parts of the step work, it was really, really hard and tempting. But I will say, yes, steps 1 through 3 definitely helped me to rediscover a sense of spirituality that I feel like I had lost in my youth.
Do you think psychedelics have helped you connect with that spirituality?
100%. 100%, because my higher power has revealed herself to me, and she's going to help me to remember to slow down and think and be more mindful with how I'm reacting to whatever the world is presenting me, to not react from a place of fear or defensiveness or self-righteousness or in a very close-minded way. I think the psilocybin and even some of the microdosing of it helps me to keep my thoughts and my behaviors and my actions more in a progressively, spiritually deeper growing kind of direction, instead of the way I was living, which was a way to indulge in my addiction and hope and pray that I'm hiding it well enough that no one can tell. And since I've recovered from alcohol addiction, or I'm still in recovery, but I'm very proud to be sober, I've realized that a lot of those bad behaviors were me just self-medicating anxiety and nervous feelings and fears. And that instead, if can do the deep dive, slow down, center myself, meditate, and think through things, I can usually come up with a much better response, especially now that I've learned to become more of one that thinks through their heart space. And sincerely, now I'm trying when I interact with someone to think, okay, what might have they have just experienced? Maybe this is a happy time I want to share, but maybe I need to kind of test the waters before I share it and see how someone else might be feeling and how they may be thinking and where their headspace may be when they hear what I have to say. And think sometimes, would this be the most thoughtful thing for them? And not just satisfying my own impulses. And I look back and think, wow, if I had lived the first 50 something of my years with that kind of gift of insight that the mushrooms have provided.
And I hear the gift of compassion going from absolute self-centeredness to being preoccupied or even thinking about what other people might be going through and having that empath being awakened. This is beautiful. I'd like to ask you a question about your integration practice. What does it look like nowadays when you have a ceremony or a therapy session involving psychedelics or microdose? How do you integrate? What's your integration practice?
Well, as far as integrating after a carefully and deliberately planned journey for what I would consider a ceremonial dose, first thing I do is write. I don't like to talk to anybody right afterwards. I like to spend an hour or two in a room by myself and just write and write and write. And it doesn't matter if it's straight on the lines of a piece of paper. I just write everything I can remember, every symbol, every little detail, because sometimes the little details are hints of things yet to explore or uncover. And so I write a lot about it. And then for me, I'm kind of a bath person. I like to just sit in a dark, warm bath and really just be with my higher power. That's comforting and soothing for me. And so I like to do that and then slowly come back out. But after a journey, I will be conversational and polite with the others in my home, but I'm really introspective and quiet and kind of not laser focusing in a way that puts pressure on you, but really just letting myself be deep in thought and prayer and kind of slowly, maybe by after dinner next day, be ready to come back out and tackle the world again. But I feel like every time I've had a psychedelic journey, that a big takeaway, a big kind of aha moment, this makes sense now kind of thing happens. And I've had that happen even some within my family members that I don't feel like, that I know they've left their earthly bodies, they've gone, but I feel like in some way I'm able to embody some of their traits that I admired the most about them. And rather than think, boy, I sure do miss, say, for example, my father. He died when he was in his 60s, and it was way too soon. And instead of feeling sadness for myself and wallowing in my grief like I had done for the past 10 years, I feel like I've had the insight now to look at the gift that his life was and to be inspired by those special good things and try and embody those and maybe leave behind some of my other icky traits and more embody that from people in my history that I've admired as I've been able to understand kind of where they were in their life during the time certain things happened. For example, be able to realize, hey, my grandfather had been in World War II. His behaviors, his patterns, his thoughts were shaped by that experience, and kind of take that into consideration when you look back on times in the past and reflect on what might have been contributing to their behavior that normally we just don't get that inside out view to know what's happening. And I think psychedelics have created more of a feeling of interconnectedness with all beings and a desire to appreciate the beauty and cultivate a garden that is going to harvest positivity and hope and goodness instead of continuing to plant that garden by going to the warehouse club and getting a really good deal on alcohol and setting aside perfect ways to hide and use and have it on hand as a quick coping skill. And none of those desires have ever returned. I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful.
I can hear that. And we're coming towards the end of our program today. But one question that I ask everyone before we go, if you don't mind sharing that, is what are you still struggling with at the moment, a challenge in your life, in your recovery that you're currently working to overcome with or without psychedelics?
Inappropriate guilt. Inappropriate guilt about unrealistic expectations that I still sometimes put pressure on myself to achieve. I find myself a lot of times saying, boy, that was great, but next time, man, if I had just thought of this, it would have been so much better. Or, wow, if I had just returned a phone call quicker, or if I had given someone my true full attention instead of being human and occasionally being distracted by something. It's really hard for me sometimes to, I do celebrate my accomplishments, but to really feel like I deserve feeling such a thing as accomplishing things. I'm still kind of recovering from a really low self-esteem that had been driven into me. It's taking a while to recognize that I am a person worthy of being loved and acceptance. And boy, that certainly changes your mindset in life too.
Yeah,
That's
of course. I remember in rehab, I was taught something that stuck with me. They say you rebuild your self-esteem by doing esteemable things. And that's the great thing about being part of a fellowship, is that we do service, particularly you. You do a lot of service in PIR. And I think that journey of contributing and helping others and being a secretary of a meeting or a greeter or a timekeeper, little bit by little bit, that self-esteem is being rebuilt one day at a time. And that's a magic combo of meeting, service, step, fellowship, really.
one thing that I hadn't anticipated that was really positive is, a lot of my time when I was living in fear, it would be what if? What if this is going to be so stressful? I'm going to not be able to manage it and I'll have to resort to a bad coping skill, an inappropriate coping skill. But now with the fellowship, it's different because I have a different what if. The what if for me now is what if I can pick up the phone? I can call my sponsor. I can call a friend in recovery. PIR represents a lot of different time zones. So chances are, between all the different countries that the PIR fellowship encompasses, there's going to be someone that's awake, and it will be a convenient time. So now, what if doesn't have to be, what if, well, I've got my friend alcohol here that's going to help me out. Now it's what if I've got a fellowship full of people. I've got phone numbers. I've got peers in recovery that are walking this path with me. And it's nice to have that as a what if. If this happens, then I will make a call, rather than an if, then I'll drink. And you have a lot to do with that. I thank you so much for that, Anne.
Thank you very much, Christy. It was a fantastic interview. I am delighted you took the time to tell us your story, which is an extraordinary story of recovery. Do you have any closing comments? Anything you want to leave us with?
Say fear guided me for a lot of my decision making. And if I had not already felt like I'd been to hell and back. I don't think I would have been able to overcome the fear of trying something new with the psychedelics. I think it was something that I genuinely felt called to do. And I want to emphasize that I went through 9 months of preparation before I had my first dose. So when I mention being called to do, I don't mean this as an impulsive thing. I mean a being called as in something stirs inside of you and you know that it's time to learn more, time for another lesson. And you can trust your teacher, the medicine, to help you open up and see things that otherwise we were perfectly content to have our eyes blind to.
Yeah, what you just said reminded me of a quote from David Bowie. He said, religion is for the people who fear hell, and spirituality is for those who've been there and back.
Exactly.
That's what I heard in your closing comments. Thanks again very much, Christy, for coming on the radio and sharing your experience with us. I am sure it will be a delight for the many people who are going to listen to you. And until next time, thank you very much and goodbye. Psychedelics in Recovery is a peer-led fellowship guided by anonymity, non-endorsement, and mutual respect. Thank you for listening and for placing principles before personalities.